I'm Adam Mercer. This is Black Files.
The Black Files. File 007. The Enfield Poltergeist. There are houses people are afraid to enter. And then, there are houses people are afraid to remember. Most hauntings begin with a story. A sound in the night. A shadow on the stairs. A child speaking to someone no one else can see. But sometimes the story begins much earlier, long before the family moves in, long before the first knock, long before anyone thinks to ask what was here before the walls were built. Enfield, North London. August 1977. A mother calls the police after hearing violent knocking inside her home. Furniture moves without explanation. Children wake screaming. A voice begins speaking through an 11-year-old girl in tones no child should be able to produce. The newspapers call it one of the most disturbing hauntings in Britain. The church calls it a possible infestation. Skeptics call it fraud. The foundation called it a sealed domestic anomaly, and they sent me in alone. My name is Adam Mercer, and this is Black Files. The order came through just after dusk. No supporting notes, no field team, no lab clearance, no priest, just an address, a paper file, and a red handwritten warning clipped to the cover. Do not conduct direct questioning of the child after midnight. That was all. I'd seen enough files like this to know what that meant. Someone had already been there. Someone had already seen enough to get nervous. And someone higher up had decided that whatever was happening in that house was better handled quietly. The street was almost empty when I arrived. A weak line of yellow light stretched beneath the lamps. The houses stood in a neat row, plain and tired, the kind built to look identical, so no one would ever imagine one of them could become infamous. Number 284 looked ordinary. That's the first thing that bothered me. No broken windows, no police line, no crowd outside, no visible damage. Just one dim light beyond the curtains and a silence that felt unnatural, as though the whole terrace had learned to keep its distance. I stepped through the front gate and felt it immediately. A pressure change, subtle but unmistakable. The air carried that same wrongness I'd encountered before other sites the foundation later sealed. Not a smell, not a sound, not even a temperature shift at first. Just the sensation that the space around me was under tension, like something beneath it was pushing upward. The mother answered the door before I knocked. She looked drained, eyes red from sleeplessness, hands trembling, but not from fear alone. This was the tremor of someone who had gone beyond panic and entered exhaustion. She stared at me for a moment, then moved aside without asking for identification. That happened more often than people think. Once terror takes hold, you stop asking who someone is. You start hoping they can make it stop. "It's quiet right now," she said. Her voice was low, careful. "That's when it listens." Inside, the house smelled of tea, old fabric, damp plaster, and the trapped warmth of too many sleepless nights. The sitting room was cramped. Several chairs had been pulled away from the center of the room as if no one trusted leaving anything loose. A crucifix lay on the mantelpiece beside a child's toy with one missing eye. On the floor near the stairs was a tape recorder, cheap, domestic, worn from use. They had started documenting it themselves. That told me two things. First, the family already knew no one would believe them without proof. Second, whatever was happening had gone on long enough for fear to become routine. I asked where the disturbances began. She didn't answer straight away. She only looked up toward the ceiling. "The girls' room," she said at last, "but it moves now." I asked what she meant. Her face tightened. "Some nights it's in the wardrobe, some nights in the hall, some nights in the walls. And sometimes," she hesitated, "sometimes it stands in the corner and waits." That detail was not in the file. I opened the folder again in the hallway and checked every page under the lamplight. Object movement, heavy knocking, levitation claims, altered voice phenomena, witness distress, police attendance, media contamination risk. No mention of a standing figure, no mention of visual manifestation, which meant one of two things. Either the foundation hadn't been told, or they had chosen not to write it down. I asked to see the children. 2 younger boys were asleep in the back room under blankets, though both appeared restless, turning and muttering in their sleep. The older girl wouldn't look at me. She sat with her knees to her chest on a sofa, face pale, lips pressed together, watching the staircase as if expecting someone to descend from it. And then there was Janet, 11 years old, thin, tired, alert in a way children should never be. Upstairs in the room she shared with her sister, staring not at me, but at the peeling section of wallpaper above the skirting board near the far corner. The room was narrow. 2 beds, 1 wardrobe, scuffed carpet, a small window with worn curtains. Nothing remarkable. That also bothered me. There is a particular cruelty to hauntings that happen in ordinary rooms. No ruined manor, no abandoned hospital, no gothic nonsense. Just childhood interrupted. Janet spoke before I did. "It doesn't like strangers." Her tone was flat, not frightened, not theatrical, just tired. I asked what "it" was. She shrugged. "Depends when you ask." I've learned not to dismiss answers like that. Children don't always explain things well, but they often explain them honestly. I examined the room, window catches, radiator fittings, the underside of the bed frames, the wardrobe panels, the wall behind the beds. No wires, no rigging, no hidden audio equipment, no sign of tampering. The wallpaper near the corner had come loose in long, soft strips. That wasn't unusual in an old house, but there were scratches beneath it. Not fresh, not deep, just enough to suggest something had been marked there once and then covered over. I crouched to look closer. Then the knocking began, 3 slow impacts. Not against the wall, inside it. The sound came from behind the plaster to my left, at shoulder height, as though someone sealed within the structure had struck the inside of the house with the side of a fist. I turned at once. Janet didn't flinch. Neither did her sister. That was worse than the sound itself. Children do not stop reacting to fear unless the fear has become familiar. I asked how long it had been happening. "Too long," the mother said from the doorway. I asked whether the voice always came through Janet. She nodded. "Mostly after dark. Always worse when people come to question her, and if we ask it what it wants, the whole house changes." "What do you mean, changes?" She looked at the floor. "The rooms feel smaller. The ceiling sounds like footsteps. The walls breathe. I've heard frightened people describe ordinary sounds in extraordinary ways. This did not feel like that. There was no confusion in her tone, only repetition. She was not inventing. She was remembering. I moved the children downstairs, left the girls' door shut, placed the tape recorder on the landing, checked my watch. 11:41 p.m. Then I turned off every light on the upper floor except the hall lamp and listened. The house settled. Pipes cooled. Floorboards released the day's stored heat in slow clicks. For a moment, it almost felt normal. At 11:47, a chair scraped violently across the bedroom floor. At 11:48, there was a second impact against the inside of the door. At 11:49, the recorder picked up breathing from the landing. Deep, wet, labored. Not human breathing at rest, more like the effort of something trying to remember how lungs were supposed to work. I opened the bedroom door slowly. Nothing moved, but the chair by the wardrobe had shifted nearly 2 feet across the floor. The window remained shut. The girls stood together at the bottom of the stairs below me, watching. Then Janet whispered, "It knows you're here now." I went back down and asked the mother the most important question in any haunting. What changed before it began? Not what they saw, not what they heard. What changed? People rarely think to ask that, but hauntings often follow disturbance, renovation, a death, a removal, a discovery. Something touched, something opened. She rubbed her hands together and said they'd had work done months earlier, minor repairs, floor damage in the front room. A section near the hearth had sunk slightly and had to be reinforced. That was enough. Structures do not become active without reason. Something had shifted, a support point, perhaps, a seal, a barrier, a buried cavity. I asked whether anything unusual had been found beneath the floor. She said the workers mentioned old brickwork, an odd space under the house. Nothing more. Nothing more. The most dangerous phrase in any foundation file. At 11:58, every light in the sitting room dimmed at once. No power cut, no blown bulb, just a synchronized drop, as though the house had inhaled. The younger boy woke screaming. Janet stood up very slowly, and at exactly midnight she spoke, in a voice that was not hers. "I remember your file." Every person in that room froze. Her head tilted slightly to one side, too far to be natural, and her expression emptied completely. No blinking, no strain, no performance, just that voice, old, dry, male, as if it had been dragged through dust before reaching us. I stepped toward her. She turned her eyes on me. "You are late, Mercer." No one in that house should have known my name. I asked it what it was. Janet's lips parted. The reply came soft enough to make us all lean in. "This place is not haunted." A pause. "It is open." Then the lights died. The crash upstairs was immediate. Wood striking wall, glass rattling, the ceiling shaking under the weight of something running across it, though there was no room above that level for anyone to run. The boys began crying. The mother dropped beside them. The older girl covered her ears and started saying the same prayer over and over, under her breath, faster each time, until the words blurred together. I took my torch and went upstairs alone. The landing seemed longer now. That happened sometimes in active sites, not physically longer, just wrong in scale. Distances no longer behaving the way your body expects them to. The girl's bedroom door stood open. I knew I had closed it. Inside, the wallpaper above the bed had peeled away in curling strips, exposing lines cut into the plaster beneath. Symbols, rough, incomplete, but deliberate. I had seen their shape once before in a restricted foundation archive. Early containment notation. Old field marks used before standardized sealing protocols. Not to trap an entity within a room, to hold something dormant within a structure. The house itself had been part of the containment. That explained the knocks, the movement, the localized pressure, the erratic voice transmission. This was no ordinary poltergeist. The family hadn't been haunted by an arrival. They had been living over a breach point. The repairs under the floor had disturbed whatever had been layered into the foundation decades earlier, and since then, the pressure had been building upward through the walls, using the weakest emotional channel available, Janet. Children are often described as more sensitive. That's too vague. The truth is simpler. Some structures respond to instability, and fear is easier to amplify through the young. The temperature plunged. My breath turned white. And then I saw him. Not clearly, not fully, just the outline of a tall figure standing in the far corner where the wallpaper hung loose, black against black, too still to be human, its proportions slightly wrong, as if the room had not been built to contain its shape. Two pale eyes reflected the torchlight, not glowing, reflecting, like something physical was there. I raised the beam higher. The figure remained. Then slowly it smiled. The room detonated. One bed lifted from the floor and slammed sideways. The wardrobe doors burst open. The mirror cracked in a bright, jagged line before shattering across the carpet. The walls began hammering from within. Left, right, behind me. Under the floor, impacts traveling through the house like trapped fists searching for a way out. Below me I heard the mother screaming my name, the younger children crying, Janet laughing in that same dry male voice. I steadied myself against the doorframe and forced my breathing down. Panic gives these places momentum. You do not fight that kind of pressure with fear. You fight it with definition. So I spoke to it, not as a priest, not as a believer, not as a man trying to save his own nerves. As an investigator, I told it the site had been identified. I told it its concealment was broken. I told it foundation containment teams would return with concrete, iron, and fire, and that whatever memory of freedom it had found through the family would end here if it pushed any further. The pounding stopped, not all at once, one wall at a time, like a thought withdrawing. The figure in the corner tilted its head, and when it answered, the voice came not from the apparition, not from Janet downstairs, but from the room itself. "You cannot seal a door," it said, "that remembers being opened." The floor buckled beneath my feet. For a second I thought the whole room was about to collapse inward. Instead, the symbols in the plaster split straight through the center. A crack ran downward into the wall, across the skirting board, and into the floorboards below. Then everything stopped. Silence. Total, violent, absolute. No footsteps, no crying, no breathing in the walls. Just the sound of my torch shaking slightly in my hand. I swept the beam back to the corner. The figure was gone. When I made it downstairs, Janet was unconscious on the sofa. The mother held both boys against her. The older girl stared at me with the expression people wear when they already know the answer is bad and want to hear it anyway. I told them to leave before sunrise. No packing, no waiting, no argument. Just leave. The foundation arrived an hour later in 2 unmarked vehicles and tried to take control of the property as though this were now a manageable site. It wasn't. I told them the containment marks had cracked, that the structure had failed, that whatever was under the house had moved from passive dormancy into awareness. They asked whether the entity had identified itself. No. They asked whether it had crossed threshold. Not fully. They asked whether the family had been contaminated. I told them I didn't know. That answer didn't please them. Nothing ever does when it means the file remains alive. The official report buried the case under the usual language: stress, suggestion, exaggeration, media interference, fraud. That is how these things survive, not by remaining invisible, by remaining explainable. But what happened in Enfield was real, not because every witness detail must be true, not because every photograph proves what people think it proves, and not because every voice from the dark belongs to the dead. It was real because something in that house responded to pressure, to intrusion, to attention, something old enough to wait inside brick and plaster for years, something patient enough to let the family believe they were dealing with a ghost while it tested the edges of its confinement. When I reviewed the landing recorder later that morning, I found one sound buried beneath the knocks and the breathing: a whisper, a child's voice, not Janet's, not any voice from the house, just 4 words repeated softly beneath the static. Who opened it first? That question mattered, because things like this do not begin when families move in. They begin when something is found, something disturbed, something half-sealed by people who never finished what they started. The Enfield house still stands, quieter now, but not clean. Places like that are never clean. They hold an impression, a memory of pressure, a weakness in the shape of the world. And sometimes, when the structure settles at night, those memories push upward. One knock, then another, then 3. As if something beneath the floor is still checking whether the door above it remembers how to give way. This is Adam Mercer, and the case is far from over.